Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Malachi's Message, Toxic Mold Sucks podcast. I'm Elizabeth Kripe, Executive Director of Malachi's Message. Co-hosting today is our co-founder and board chair, Emily Rochelle. Emily is actually the connection to our guest today. She called me very excited about somebody she'd been introduced to. We have the unique privilege of introducing y'all to Jason Kester. He is a mold consultant. And Jason, y'all are in the Pacific Northwest, correct?
That is correct.
And a pretty fairly smaller practice as we've been talking, but we were so impressed when we Emily talked to you, and we looked at your website, and you guys were very clear that you guys are big on not profiting from sampling fees, and you do not provide remediation services to ensure that there isn't any room for a bias or like getting a kickback. And both of those stood out to us. So we are very excited to have you on today to talk about assessments, inspections, and really why you've set up your model the way that you have.
Awesome. Yes, that's correct.
Jason, it was such a pleasure when I first had that conversation with you initially. I actually was looking for a good inspector in your area for this person that needed an inspector. And it's so hard, because people can put up really good websites and put all the, the great things on their website that make them look like they're credible or they know what they're doing. But then, unfortunately, a lot of times, many times, they don't do a very thorough inspection. So when I spoke to you, and it was, I just knew after all the questions I asked and all the answers you gave me that you actually do know what you're doing, but more importantly, you actually care about the people you're helping. So I just want to say thank you so much for all the good things that you're doing for others that are going through mold. And
well, thank you. That's kind. Those are kind words. Thank you.
And then you also got into the industry because of mold. Can you kind of share, how this journey and this venture started to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so I actually was dating back in 2012. I was dating a woman who got sick, and she had some experience with mold. At the time, she was actually the national sales manager for Real Time Lab, so we knew there was a better mousetrap, but that kind of dives in a little bit further. But like, essentially, she got sick. She was living in a moldy cottage, being a man and all. I'm like, I can help solve the problem. So I got involved and tried to get educated, and started working with her and kind of understanding what was going on with the home, the little cottages. They were tearing it down, and I was able to communicate that message to her doctor with the correct terms of framing and siding and sheathing and blah 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 and all the construction type terms. And the doctor kind of shared with me the gap in the industry. So I started the business as a kind of a side gig, thinking I'd be pushed out of the market in a couple of years, and last month was 9 years. So it's been I always say I kind of tripped, slipped, and fell into mold. And prior to that, I knew absolutely nothing. And it's amazing when you start to learn about this. And at this point, I attend medical conferences with my doctors, around this from an educational standpoint. And absolutely, we're just, we're trying to do the best we can for our customer population up in this area. So,
yeah. You actually will speak to a client's doctor, correct, on their behalf?
Yeah, but our standard process is, so essentially the process that how people get to us basically is they go to their doctor. They're sick. Obviously they go to their doctor. It's going to be either a functional medicine MD, naturopathic doctor, that kind of thing. And there's all types of other types of chiropractors and, acupuncturists and nutritionists. And, the list goes on of potential referring opportunities for them. But it's going to all be like holistic in nature for the most part. But they're sick. They'll do either take some history, take some labs, something. Their doctor will say, hey, we think that there's environmental contributing factor to the decline in health. Call Kester Clear, right? So then at that point, they come on board. We go out, we evaluate the home, right? So but we actually, when we provide the report back to that customer, we also include that referring physician so that we're closing the loop with that doctor. So they see not only the lab results, but they also see the findings that we have in the home, the recommendations that we make. So that, there are some doctors that are more active than others, but all of them will go through that report. At least I assume all of them will go through that report, with their patient to help them understand. And it helps that patient kind of reinforce, hey, look, this is what that company found. This is what, the recommendations are, and this is what's going to help get you healthy, right? So until we can actually kind of reset the microbiome in the space when that's impacted, ultimately they can put them on the best protocol, but they're never going to actually get there because they're just continuously being exposed to what's in their home. So
I love that you're giving them a voice. I mean, when we went through mold 2, you feel so powerless and so overwhelmed. To have that report and know your doctor has full access to it, it is essentially like you're giving this whole population that's overwhelmed and silent a voice and saying, hey, we got your back here. We're going to put it in words for you, which is amazing. That's so critical. And that's something a lot of people don't have and don't know how to articulate.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, absolutely. So, and the doctors are aware too, that if they have questions on the reports or want to go through the results or whatever it might be, most of the doctors have direct access to me versus like booking through our website, which goes to my admin and that kind of thing. But most of the doctors know that if they have questions on the report, they can just reach directly to me and we can go through answers and stuff like that.
Wow, that's incredible. What is, as an inspector, I'm just going to ask it because it's one of those lovely hot topics in this industry.
Sure.
What is your perspective or opinion, professional opinion on air sampling?
For lack of a better way to put it, it's worthless. It provides zero data, zero reliable data. And I always tell people that ask me about that, like customer population, I always give them a very, very simple example. And this is something I've done probably about a half a dozen times, where I will find mold growing in a small closet or something like that that's very isolated, really small, cubic foot space. And I'll go out, I'll get my air sampling equipment, because we do inner wall air sample, very direct targeted inner wall air samples where there's plumbing and things like that. We've actually got some amazing results from that. But from a generic air sampling standpoint, I'll go in, they'll go grab my air sampling equipment. I'll actually set it up in that little closet, close the door, run the sample, do the 75 liters, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll come back and I'll take all that out, and then I'll do a swab sample. And of course, visually the mold's there because that's obvious to see. We can swab sample it. And of course, that swab sample comes back positive for whatever it is, Aspergillus, Penicillium, Chaetomium, Stachy, whatever the nasty things are. But every single time I've done it, the air sample comes back negative. There's literally nothing in the air sample. So Stachybotrys chartarum, like if you have an active colony, in any 24-hour period of time, those spores are only airborne for about 15 minutes of that 24-hour period of time, because Stachy needs such a high moisture content. The spores they're on the upper echelon of the size of mold spores. So when they are released from the colony, they're so heavy and sticky and thick that they land very, very close to where the active colony is, and they're not airborne for very long because they're so heavy. But once they land, they're not going anywhere because they're wet and sticky. They're going to stick to whatever surface they're on. So we inevitably end up testing a medium that doesn't include what we're testing for. And so, it doesn't really matter. It's kind of like, I'm going to test water for pumpkins and see if any pumpkins are in there. Well, there's no pumpkins in there, so the water's safe. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense, right? So it's just like, it's just a pointless. I could go on a diatribe on this, but it's just such a non-starter for me. It's like, I've had people come back and be like, well, you didn't do any air sample. I'm like, and there's a reason for that, right? We're doing dust sampling. We're looking at testing the locations where these spores are going to fall onto. We're looking at horizontal, and I do raised horizontal surfaces for like an ERMI test or something like that. But, we're getting a DNA-based testing, which gives us toxicity concern because we can make a direct tie to mycotoxins, right? So
you're absolutely right. We've done studies ourselves. Josh has actually gone into a contained space where they did remediation to do clearance testing, and he's gone in there into the containment area, and he's, did an air sample, and then like only a few spores of Stachy showed up, right? Then he actually air washed the contained space, and then he did another air sample, was like over 300,000 spores of Stachy showed up, and yes, air samples are, I mean, would you agree? I mean, the most important and critical part of the entire process is the actual first thorough investigation where you find them, and then you find the sources. Sampling is secondary.
Absolutely, 100%. Like we actually at this point we do an ERMI in every home because that's what the doctors that we partner with want. And those doctors are they account for 90+% of our actual business as a direct doctor referral. So but those doctors don't want air sampling. None of them do. Right. So they want an ERMI, we do an ERMI. We find, an ERMI is a single point of data, right? And it can be very historic because it is DNA. It doesn't tell us, hey, look, there's a problem right there today. The whole point of an ERMI is is to say, hey, look, do we have a toxicity-based concern throughout the space? But the ERMI is a single point of data. We will work with people to help them collect their own ERMI prior to us even getting there. Like, hey, look, collect your own ERMI, do it yourself. Like we'll give you a free interpretation of the results. And if it warrants it based on our criteria, we'll come out and do an assessment. And then even if it doesn't warrant it, you still want us to come out, we'll come out. But there's certain criteria. I work with some doctors out of Northern California. They have a slightly different interpretation of the ERMI that I do, where they put some critical dynamics around some of the things that I just don't. But I'm okay with that. Like it's their call as to what they think, and that we always defer back to the referring physician, right? Because even when we talk about bioremediation recommendations, we look at group 1. I don't care about the final score of an ERMI, so we're diving into a whole different realm. But we have certain criteria, but it always defers back to that referring physician, right? So if they recommend like bioremediation or certain thresholds be met, then that's what we always defer to, right? And actually on the point of that, like when somebody actually forces me to do air sampling, I do the same exact thing. I literally keep a leaf blower in my car, and we're going to move that air. We're going to get the particulate that we're testing for into the medium we're testing, which is the air. So I will do the same thing when kind of quote unquote forced to do so.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're just wasting their money.
Absolutely. Yeah. And since I don't profit on sampling, I'm wasting my time.
Yeah. What's another really good question for you? I feel like I could ask you really good questions.
Well, I was going to ask, why don't you profit on sampling?
Well, that's a really easy one. I've built my entire business, and this is a philosophy way back from the beginning I started in November of 2013, and I kind of built this business with a very, very targeted focus on just having no conflict of interest, right? If I kind of looked at it and said, if I'm going to be the customer, that homeowner receiving this contractor into my house, what would I want it to look like, right? So when you take that type of focus, profiting on sampling, it can't be possible, right? Because even whether I do or don't, there's always that possibility that we're going to recommend a bunch of samples that you don't need today because I want to make a couple extra bucks. Maybe, you got to take the kid to the park, and you got to take him to I got a trip planned or whatever, right? I mean, like there's always going to be that opportunity, and that's what I don't want, is the opportunity, right? So like you could be the most ethical person and never have that be the case, but if in the back of your mind, it's just human nature. Like you're going to recommend additional samples that they may not need. And the other thing that I'll say is, I was speaking to a doctor, not sure if we want to mention names, but when I kind of share about what we do, how we do it, that kind of thing. And she said, oh yeah, it's one of our biggest concerns is we get a lot of people that don't want to pay for the sampling. And I'm like, yeah, I don't have that. And she's like, what do you mean? Like, I never have a customer reject sampling. And she's like, well, how is that? I'm like, because we don't profit on it. Because if and we're very, very clear with our customers about that parameter, right? We don't profit on sampling. The reality is, if I come to you as a customer, I'm like, hey, look, this is what's going to help you. It's going to help your doctors, it's going to help the remediation doctors, it's going to help everybody understand what's happening inside this home. And it's something I highly recommend that you do. I'm not making a penny on this. I'm going to lose time and money to collect this for you because I'm not profiting on it, which means that like I'm literally, my pay structure is over here. It's already set. I know what I'm making today. And no matter what sampling I do or don't do, so I make more money if I don't do any sampling, right? But if I do the sampling that is good and recommended and we do it, it's only at the benefit of the customer, at the benefit of the doctor, everybody's benefiting to understand what's happening toxicity based wise. We do an ERMI on every floor. We do those targeted interwall air samples. And we've never had anybody say, yeah, no, I don't want you to do that. I don't think we need to pay for that. It seems like, and what we don't ever get is the upsell, right? Or you're just trying to upsell. No, I promise I'm not. Like, if you don't want to do it, fair enough. Like we always make recommendations on sampling, but it is always the customer's final decision in the end. And we sit down with them after the actual physical aspect of the assessment is done. We literally build a sampling protocol, during the assessment to a certain extent. But we go through, we count how many sinks and toilets we can access and that kind of thing, and how many ERMIs we're doing. We sit down with them and be like, okay, so here's here's what we recommend. Here's if there is any modification to the pricings, we budget in some sampling in there. But if there is any we're really clear about that. Like, this is what this is going to increase the pricing, and do you approve? And then it's always a verbal approval. And we don't have that where they just say no, we don't. We because there's no conflict of interest. Nobody believes that there's a problem, right?
What does your average cost kind of run for a home, like for an assessment up where you're at? Because I know it's kind of different in all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for pricing for us is going to be somewhere between, and like I said, our base pricing actually includes 1 ERMI, 6 inner wall air samples, a couple of swab samples. But our base pricing for 1,000 square feet or smaller is $1,500, and then it increases from there depending on the square footage of the home.
You know, one thing I found and is that sampling, because when we go out to homes, you know, we show them where the mold is, we show them where the problem is, and depending on the situation, let's say this person owns his home, right? They already have medical testing showing what they're being exposed to. They just need us to go out there and find it. And we go there and find it, and we take the photographs, so they have the photographs of the evidence. But you know, what we found though is over the years is that a lot of remediation contractors don't know what mold looks like. And so when they open up the walls, you know, they see this white pattern-like substance and they call it sheetrock dust or something, and they don't call it mold. And then the clients question us, and it's like, we have to go back out there and sample it and say, okay, well, this is what it is. It's aspergillus, you know, that's not dust. We weren't wrong. So in order to kind of get ahead of that, you know, we've actually started, like, if they're going to go full-blown remediation, it's like, let us get one wall cavity sample, like, even if we have to pay for it, so that way the contractor can't argue with us when he opens up that wall.
Yeah, I work with, I have a mentor, Martine Davis, which you may or may not know of. She's out of Madison, Wisconsin. And she actually was a mentor of mine when I first started this. And she was the one that kind of convinced me to start doing inner wall air samples. And she actually made the same comment to me. She's like, here's the thing is, we've had plenty of times where we open it up and it doesn't really appear that there's mold inside that wall cavity. But I mean, the inner wall air sample confirms that we know that it's there, and that white film may not look like mold, but she actually made the same comment. You know, we actually do make a recommendation for remediation contractors. We have one that we work with predominantly. They're out of the Portland area, but they support our customers all over Washington and Oregon. They know it. They're very, very good at what they do. The owner has gone through some mold illness stuff. Like, he's part of he and I have, like, in conjunction, built our bioremediation process that we put forth on our reports and that they perform. Obviously, we've just kind of fine-tuned that, much to his expense over the 6 years or something like that we've been working with them. Because, like, from the beginning, it was, you know, we built what we thought was going to work, and then maybe it wasn't great, so we built it a different way, and we kind of modified it here and tweaked it there. And then at this point, you know, post remediation, you know, they're getting passing Hertzme scores, which is passing DNA testing. Like, our post testing is always DNA based. So, and I guess that's unheard of. I was you know, talking to Dr. Krista again, and she was like saying, well, she's unfamiliar with anybody else getting passing Hertzme scores after a bioremediation or small particle cleanup standpoint. And that's what we're getting up here, which is pretty amazing. So they've done a great job. So the point of that is, like, the company that we generally recommend, because any other Joe Blow mold remediation contractor, you're absolutely right. They have, just like the inspection side of things, most of them don't really know what they're doing. Because, like, I mean, demo's demo, right? Like, isn't demo day? It's fun, right? We get to go tear stuff down. Well, that's all great, except for, you know, your containment isn't sealed. You got flapping plastic everywhere, or look, there's still, like, I'll come in post remediation and there's, like, still active mold growing everywhere, right? Like, literally stuff that I can just see on the drywall. Look, there's black stuff on the drywall. We tested, it's Chatomium. Maybe you should take that out. You know, like, you are a mold remediation contractor. But, you know, like, the contractors we partner with, they demo, they do a great job. We have our protocol that goes 18 inches beyond impacted material. So we're always kind of getting that full remediation protocol taken care of. So we haven't necessarily experienced that yet, because we work with a fairly successful mold remediation contractor here in the, you know, greater Pacific Northwest area here. So I'm pretty blessed on that one.
So question, and I don't want to step on toes with this, but are they a company, when you say you recommend them, do you recommend them, or do you require that the people that you work with use them?
Oh, heck no, I don't require any. Literally, I have the last section of my report is a list of potential contractors you can work with, but I'm really, really clear. I have no affiliation with them. They have no affiliation with me. Work with them if you want to, work with other people if you want to. And I always tell people, work with anybody you want. And if they can follow the protocols in the report, they should be able to do it successfully. If they don't follow the protocols in the report, which, as we all know, happens all the time, oh, well, we're ready for post-remediation testing. Okay, great. Did you do any bioremediation? Nope. Well, your ERMI was started out with like a 45 in group 1, and you had elevated K-tomium and Stacky, and your Hertzsprung score was a 30. So clearly you're not ready, right? And if you didn't do that, then me coming back and testing is I'm just going to test the same DNA that was there before. So we don't really expect a difference. So we get lots of companies that try to step in and do the work, but they fall flat on their face every single time.
Why do you think that is? Is it because there's a lack of required training on their end, or let me just ask you this? I mean, because I know our state, Texas, has requirements and qualifications and rules, and contractors who do mold remediation can get their license suspended. They can get slapped on the wrist, and that will be up there for people to read about like what they did wrong. Like, what is it like over there in your state? Are there any rules or regulations or requirements?
Nope.
Do they have to go to any training, or can they just wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to go be a mold remediation contractor and go do that?
Yeah, no, there's no rules. I kind of look at, other than obviously the Gulf Coast states, which and then New York, New Jersey, who have some certification processes and requirements for doing that. Obviously those are focused more on like hurricane response and things like that, which is awesome. But again, they're still deferring back to like the S520, which is a rudimentary document, and it's great, but it's basically it's a document full of recommendations that are kind of like, well, if you want to do mold remediation, you could do it this way. But the reality is here, like, there are no regulations. I still feel like the mold industry is like the Wild West. It's like, there's like, you could legitimately slap a sign up on the side of your van if you want and say you're a mold remediation contractor, and off you go. I mean, it was probably like 4 or 5 years ago. I had a customer who I felt horrible for her, but she bought a house, a little condo, didn't hire me because she was on budget, took everything she could to buy this condo. The original builder never actually secured the skylights in their holes. So they were literally just rested right on top of the chase for the skylight. So of course, major wind and water comes through. Literally mold or water just comes flooding in on her, and she then has to. So the mold remediation contractor that shows up is a plumbing, because now everybody's busy, right? Because like we had this major rain, everything's flooded. So literally the company that shows up is like some it's a plumbing contractor. It's like Joe's Plumbing Northwest or something like that. And now all of a sudden they're mold remediation contractors. And, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like if you have a general contracting license, I'm assuming you have to have some sort of license to be able to do general contracting work. But other than that, like, and most of the guys that do mold remediation have some iteration of mold remediation certification. But, as we kind of spoke about prior to the recording, like that part's kind of a joke. Like, I see people up here in the Pacific Northwest or other reports where they tout their certification. They're like, oh, my certification is great. And I'm like, yeah, I did mine in like 3 nights on nights after work too. It's like, and it cost me like $400, and I got a PDF that said I'm a certified mold inspector, right? It's like, but those things they're not adequate related. They're adequate for you to put a sign up, but they're not adequate to work with patients dealing with environmental illness. They're not adequate for you to really know what you're doing. But since there aren't requirements, we've had the bleach and kills philosophy that stood up as mold remediation here in the Pacific Northwest in a court case. It was a tenant trying to sue a landlord. It was a big apartment complex, and they're like, well, they did something. They did bleach and kills. They did something. And it's like, oh, okay, but since there aren't any requirements, doing something is enough, right? But it's a challenge, to say the least. So, but back to your original question, which was like, why do you think it's that hard? The reality, why do you think that they fail, is because it's hard. It's really detailed work, and to do it right, it takes a lot of diligence. It takes potentially even a level of OCD to really get a contained containment area that's sealed, get that really airtight. I've had negative air machines venting into the dining room, and you're like, so you're demoing down mold and shooting everything through this, this air mover into so you're basically contaminating the whole rest of the house. And on top of that, I like that one example I was talking about for that plumbing. They told me, yeah, we set up negative air, and I got there and the plastic was just draped from the ceiling. And it was just like folded over. So you just walk in, and I'm like, if you had any sort of negative air in here, you would have sucked up all that plastic. And so this is clearly not negative air. You contaminated the entire space. Right. So it's a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of diligence, and it's hard work, right? To get numbers where we're passing post-testing with DNA-based testing, it's hard, challenging work. It's detailed, it's content management, it's really challenging. It's hard, and people, contractors say, yeah, I'll do it. And they say, hey, look, we'll follow Jason's protocols, and we'll do it on post-testing on DNA testing. And then and our warranty will base on that. They fail first time, they're like, sorry, good luck, customer, we're out. I've had that happen 4 or 5 times. And it's like, but they just don't follow through because they don't have to. They're on to the next job, right?
Are they required to carry some sort of liability insurance, so that way clients have something to go after if they do a bad job, or they take their money and they don't do the services that they paid them to do, or if they damage their property, or do they have to carry some sort of liability insurance? Do you know?
I don't know for a fact, because again, I'm not a mold remediation contractor and I don't do that work, but I imagine that the state of Washington or the state of Portland, or state of Portland, it's kind of a state, the state of Oregon, I'm sure that they require, again, as a general contractor, you have to have a contractor's license, which then you have to be licensed and bonded and that kind of stuff. So I imagine there are definitely those things, because even as a handyman, you have to hold you have to be bonded and licensed and do all of that. There's certain licensing you have to have, right? So I imagine that those are the truth. Those are truthful, that you have to have those things. I don't know to what extent, and I also don't know to what extent, other than contract law, right? Like if you were to breach a contract, like, hey, you didn't do the work, right? So like but if they did it, but of course, if there's a warranty and they guarantee their work based on a certain level and they didn't pass that certain level, then they didn't finish the work. Again, you'd be fighting with them contractually in the court, right? So I don't know what sort of recourse there is. I think it will be a challenge to, and the reality is these customers, a lot of them are so taxed anyway. Like the idea of like taking somebody to court is just not a viable option. We get people all the time that, I'm going to sue somebody. No, you're not. Let's bring it back down a little bit. Let's talk about the reality of what that looks like. Do you have 2 years to have every part of your immune system taxed and your entire energy? And, if you want to get into quantum physics, energy, like, do you have the energy? You're going to have that negative energy around you for 2 years. How is that going to impact your immune system? Is your healing going to happen? It's never going to happen. There are times most times where we just tell people, cut your losses. I'm really sorry. And that sucks, but cut your losses. Let's move forward positively, because suing somebody is not going to be a reasonable or viable option. And I've had court cases go all the way through to fruition, and I even had people win, and they spent 2 to 3 years just in utter turmoil in their life, stranded from their home, fighting, paying all these expenses. Lawyers get a big chunk. And then at the end of the day, they get pennies on the dollar for what they were asking for, but they won, and they won their case, but like, to what extent? Right. So yeah, it's a challenge.
So Jason, am I hearing correctly? Do you actually have you actually had experience where you've gone in as, I guess, the expert in their case to speak on behalf of what you found?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've been an expert witness in court cases a couple of times. I've been deposed a couple of times, done depositions and stuff like that for court cases. And I've had probably, 8 or 10 retainer dynamics where I'm helping and supporting for their court case. And then of course they settle out of court, and I give them whatever was left in their retainer, but we'll provide whatever we can. Obviously, the first part of our services are all covered under the fee, and we provide a lot of back end support for customers. But when it comes to a legal case, then we put people under a retainer and go from there.
Not a lot of inspectors can say that. Like, a lot of inspectors, try to steer away from going and doing that because you've been through it. It's hard work.
It is, yeah.
You're torn apart every which way by the other side to discredit you.
Yeah, and I'm okay with that. The reality for me is I'm very comfortable with what I'm doing, but I hear you. And the reality is, you know, the last court case I was actually on the stand for, like, it was prior to COVID, but I was actually literally on the stand, like, you know, hand up and everything else. And you know, I made some comment because the opposing counsel was badgering to a certain extent. And I'm like, well, I don't think this court case is viable. Well, why is that? Well, because we're all here. Like, I have other things to do. You have other things to do. They have other things to do. Like, this is a nightmare for everybody. I don't want to be a part of this. Right. I mean, but I am, because but that person needs help. Right. So, you know, it's like, you know, I guess I'm just too old to care anymore. People can bash me all they want. You know, I'm sure that because we interpret the ERMI, we use the ERMI, we don't do air sampling, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you guys get it too. People can say whatever they want to say, and I'm okay with that. I sleep really well at night. I'm comfortable with what I do. I love what I've built. I love what I do. Strange enough, I used to fly around the country in a suit and tie and did corporate America stuff for 15 years. But I put myself through college doing freeway construction, building and tearing down homes. So that was kind of why I was able to. The transition into this was from the home side of things was kind of interesting, and it was just learning the health, right? But I love what I do.
You can tell as you're talking about it that you're not just here to put on a presentation. Like, you actually care about what you do and the people you work with, which is incredibly refreshing.
I appreciate that. I mean, I did dress up in a fancy t-shirt today, so, you know.
I'm going to switch gears for a minute though. And
yeah.
One thing that we like to ask inspectors is, what are some things you would tell somebody, you know, when you're looking to hire somebody? So you find mold in your home, you think you have mold in your home, you're calling around, and we get this question all the time, you know, what should I ask them when I call them to see if I should be hiring this inspector? What are some of the main things you would tell somebody to be upfront about and ask when they are looking to hire a mold assessment consultant?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is the whole aspect of conflict of interest, right? I mean, if you do both inspection and remediation, right there, I mean, and most people, once you actually educate them on that, or you say, hey, look, because we get it all the time that most of the companies around here do both inspection and remediation. They're like, well, they're a one-stop shop. And here's the thing, I know I can sell it. You know, selling it, I don't sell anything for us because we just tell them what we do. But the reality is, like, I can sell. Yeah, I'm a one-stop shop. You don't have to hire two contractors. I'm just coming in. I'll do what I'll find it. I'll do the work for you. Blah blah blah. So we can sell it. I get the idea, right? But when you actually stop and you talk to that homeowner, that potential customer, and you're like, there's a big conflict of interest for somebody to come in, tell you have mold, and ask you to hire them to fix it. And most customers are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Right. But it has to almost be like spoken to them, and they have to be informed of that conflict of interest, because you can be sold anything. You know, I had a customer that I worked with like a week and a half ago, had another company come in because they were doing some other things. And they were like, well, let's just look around. I said, oh, your moisture meter is going through the roof on this shower tile and blah, blah, blah. You got to tear it all up. And I'm like, and so they called me. They're like, well, did you do the moisture meter on the? I'm like, absolutely, I did. There was no concern. Excuse me. And I'm like, so first question, were they asking for the business to demo your shower? Well, yes, they were.
Yep.
Well,
There was
okay,
actually a news
Yep.
story. They did an investigation on people that say that they do both. And they have like 3 different or 4 different inspectors come in, and they purposely, like, I forgot what they used, but they used stuff to make it look like there was mold there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the inspectors would come in, they're like, there's only one honest guy. He was like, that's not mold. Like, there's no mold here. Like, you're good, you know? But then, like, the other 2 were like, oh my God, you have mold, you know, you have moisture, you know, readings, you know, through the roof. Yeah. And they're going down the basement, and they're just like, yeah, we had to tear all this up, you know, and I can do the work for blah, blah. And because of that, you know, I won't charge you my assessment fee if you hire me to do the work. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And then the work is like, you know, thousands of dollars. And
oh, yeah.
So I love that. That's you know, that you mentioned that. Sorry, yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
No. I mean, so that's like really key number one. I mean, it's other than myself and yourself. I mean, I don't know of any other contractors that don't profit on sampling in our industry. And the industry standard is 100% markup on sampling of the lab fee that you pay, which is what I was told right out of the gate when I started. Oh, 100% markup. I'm like, yeah, no. You know, I mean, so I was approached by a very national company back in 2016 at a shoemaker conference they have organizations in New York and LA, and they have a sub group down in the kind of Florida Southeast area. and they approached me to be their Pacific Northwest branch, and they talked to me about their sampling and their pricing and everything else and their philosophy. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't have any interest. And they've had a few customers up in my area, but they can't get a foothold. But like the idea that you actually profit on sampling to me is just such a, and we talked about it earlier, but it's like, it's just such a conflict of interest that I can't see how you do, but it's also unrealistic. I mean, you might have the most honest person on the planet, and since the industry standard is the markup, it's tough to say, well, I'm going to have a requirement, like, because the focus of this question is like, what does that homeowner want to do and what questions do we ask? Like, how it's unrealistic to think that you're going to find a contractor that doesn't profit on sampling until somebody actually builds an organization for certification that defines those business processes. If anybody would possibly do that, do you know of anybody that might build that? So the idea there is like, I think the biggest thing is conflict of interest around the remediation and inspection. But if you could find somebody that doesn't profit on sampling, and I would just ask, like, hey, what's your philosophy on sampling? And like, how do you do that? What prompts a recommendation for sampling? What does your normal sampling protocol look like? Is it predefined, or is it kind of ad hoc based on what you find in the house and what the recommendations are based on finding? So like, there's some of those questions, but really it's about, conflict of interest for inspection, remediation, sampling. And then how do you, like, looking for somebody how do you support me if I'm that homeowner asking questions? Like, how do you support me after the fact, right? So, because we provide a 1-hour report review to go through everything. And then we provide free consults going forward of anything. Like if they're working with a contractor we're not familiar with and that contractor has questions, call away. Like, we want to support that as much as we possibly can. We provide a ton of support, but whether or not you're going to find another contractor that does that, that's a challenge, but it would be something to at least to ask the questions, right? How does that support look like down the road?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that they, something Emily and I have talked about, would you recommend that they ask for references of people that the inspectors worked with before to actually be able to, like?
That's kind of hard, Elizabeth, because, there's privacy and a lot of people don't want others to know that they had mold in their home,
The other dynamic around that.
That's kind of hard.
Yeah, if I'm a business owner and you ask me for references, well, guess what references I'm going to give you? I'm going to give you somebody who loves me and thinks I'm
right.
amazing and wonderful. And so it's like, I always thought, and like, it's the same thing with, like, I don't have like a banner running on my website that shows all the positive comments. I mean, the reality is I could have somebody that, and we've all had those few customers that were just I had one lady that was super unhappy with me because, like, she had somebody else, and these are her words, like, they found mold in the water line. Again, in the water line for her sink for her master bathroom. In her words, in the water line after they tore apart the faucet. And I'm like, so she got super mad and like demanded her money back. And hey, you didn't find it and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, first off, I'm unaware of any possibility of mold growing in a water line because it's a pressurized sealed water line. There's no air in there. So I'm not sure how mold can start growing, but it's inside of a system. And, contractually, we're not tearing anything apart. We're a non-demolition type of company, and we're not going to do discovery in that manner. I don't know how to help you. Like, there's always gonna be that. Am I going to share that with somebody who's looking for a reference? No. Now I don't think her complaint was warranted or accurate, but I'm not going to provide her as somebody. Like, I'm going to provide somebody who thinks I'm great, so that's, and that list is enough, and I can provide that, and that'd be great. So I don't, you could ask for references, but I mean, I even had, I'm an open book. Like, there's always things like Yelp, and I have a Yelp page that people I had a guy that put on there it was probably a year and a half ago, have no clue who he is, don't have a customer under that name, because it only gives you the first name and last initial. I'm like, I have no customer, but he claims that I sexually harassed his wife to such an extent that they were going to kick me out of their home, but then I told them to leave the home. And so they did, but he gave me a 1-star in this nasty review. And I'm like,
yeah,
I have no clue who you, and so I tried to reach out to him directly. And then I posted a whole thing. I don't even know who you are. You're not a customer that I'm familiar with. I've tried to reach out to you directly. But I mean, with Yelp, some of those reviews, and I even contacted Yelp. And Yelp was like, nope, sorry, your
Do you
fault.
think it was maybe like a home seller that got mad because he found mold?
I have no idea, because he never once responded to any inquiry that I had. So I have no idea who he is.
That is like, I would say, I don't know if for you, but whenever we get called to go do assessments for people that are looking to buy a home, that is always one of the most volatile assessments that we do, because we lose either way. You know, if we go out pretty much and we do our job and we find the mold, well, the home seller typically isn't happy because now they have to disclose that, you know, the value of their home down. If we don't find the mold and our client buys the home based off of our assessment, well, then they come after us, you know? And so we've had homeowners who, this one, oh my goodness, she had an open Facebook page too, and I got to see what she was writing, and it was like complete lies. She tried to say that Josh just, you know, trespassed on her property and did a random inspection. You know, I was like, we have it in writing from your realtor that between our client's realtor that we were supposed to show up at this time to do the assessment along with the home inspector. But because we found all this mold, she was like, I'm going to say you trespassed, you know? And I was like, yeah, that's what we do. We drive around and we look for for sale signs and we're like, jump, let's go. You know?
And with the hope of getting paid, right?
Yeah. So I don't know, that just made me think maybe it was one of the, you know, and I hate to say that, but that is the reality. You know, it's really frustrating because we're hired to do our job, and we go and do our job, and then people get mad at us for doing our job because unfortunately somebody has to pay for what we found.
Yeah, and we offer real estate transaction type of assessments as well. We squeeze them in every nook and cranny we can, because of course it's like I'm booked right now, I think into the middle of February, and like I mean I don't have free time, so now it's like when a real estate transaction comes up, you know, one of us is scrambling either on a night or a weekend or something like that. But we fit it in. The benefit for us is that we're hired by the buyer. We're almost never hired by the seller. We don't interact with realtors at all. And because we're in the state of Washington as a licensed home inspector, which we are not, you are not allowed legally to tell or recommend whether a customer should or shouldn't buy a house. So, and I had a realtor get very, very mad at me, and because I came in, I found a bunch of mold, and I told her this customer they shouldn't buy the house. And the realtor was like, are you telling her they can't buy that? They shouldn't buy that? I'm like, I absolutely am. And he's like, you can't do that legally. And I'm like, I could sue you. And I'm like, well, actually you can't, because I'm not a licensed home inspector. And actually what they're paying me for is my opinion. And so I'm more apt to kill a deal in a real estate transaction than I am to let it go through. So, because I have a very high bar, as I'm sure you do, right? So like the idea that, you know, we're going to just pass a random home, but like we work for that buyer. We don't work for anybody else. So our contract is directly with the buyer. The buyer is having us come in. Like all of those things are going in that regard. But like if I find mold, I'll be like, yeah, don't buy the house, right? And then we move on. Like if I find it early enough, we just cancel the assessment. That the home, and it's their call, right? Not mine. But it's like then we say, okay, well, we cut our fees drastically because we know they need them. They're going to need us next time, right? Maybe I was there 45 minutes or whatever, so we cut our fees significantly. We walk away. You know, we'll do an expedite and ERMI on a house for a real estate transaction as well. But yeah, I don't necessarily interact too much with the actual sellers. But again, maybe you're right. Maybe it was a house that I told some. I mean, who knows, right? So, but even at that point, we don't even provide a report or anything, because what's to report, right? So if they're walking away and not buying the house up in Washington, they don't have to provide. They just have to say, you know, based on the inspection process, the contingency window, we're backing out. Like they don't have to provide a reason. So like we don't do reports in those scenarios. And so how a seller would come across their information, I don't know. But yeah, I don't know who that was. And so, but I mean, yeah, the point, as we've tangent, but the point was, where do you look for referrals and that kind of thing? And how do you, what do you recommend? And how do people kind of find a good inspector? Yelp can be an option, but you have to take it with a grain of salt. So.
Yeah, I think that's more where my question came from, because I am obviously not in the inspection side of things. And just as somebody that would be a consumer on that and going, okay, is it worth me asking for referrals? Is it worth me looking at reviews? Because I know that there's a lot of people in this industry that now, especially, that I would never want to associate with or work with, and going, okay, how do I then find those people that are worth my time and worth my money? Because you're so desperate at that point. And I know Emily and I have looked at reviews on different companies too in the past, just in general, not specific to this industry too. And you can look and you go, man, this is so tricky because they can buy their reviews, right? Like, they can buy people, or you've got family and friends that create multiple profiles and go on and create these amazing reviews. And you're going, well, shit, I don't know what to believe anymore. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Yelp's one of those interesting ones where I think I haven't looked recently, but probably within the last 8-10 months, whatever it was. But and I just accidentally randomly came across that guy's, because it was kind of the latest result. And I was like, every now and then I go look at my Yelp page, right? But it's like, so I have like, I don't know, 8 reviews on there or something like that. But there's like another 4 or 5, 5-star reviews that are in the back end that Yelp feels, based on their algorithms, that those are potentially, false reviews. So they don't even include them in your reviews, right? Or in your stars, right? So it's like, and nobody sees those, but you're like, so who are you to decide whether or not, but you're right. Like you can buy those, you can have, so it's like, there's all that falsehood around, like anything, again, it comes back to the money, right? If you can buy something as a review, it's the same thing. It's like, if you, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
There's always that scenario where anytime there's money involved, I always go with the follow the money philosophy. So it's like, hey, what's going on here? I don't know. Where's the money? Right.
Well, I think it speaks volumes on your end for the fact that you have a lot of doctors that refer you, and obviously they trust you because they're seeing their patients, they want to keep referring you if you weren't finding where all the mold is, so their patients could, get it removed and start to recover. So yeah. I think that's really good.
And I appreciate that. And that's actually what we kind of defer to when people ask, well, how do we know this is going to be successful and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, ultimately, when I used to do my own inbound calls, I'm sure as we all did before. And so I had people that were like, oh, you need to sell me on this. I'm like, no, I don't. Like, this is what we do. This is how we do it. And if you want to work with us, then I'm happy to do it. But if not, I hate to say it this way, but I'll move on to the next guy. Right. But the reality is like, and this is what I tell people that ask the question. It's like, I've been working directly with doctors for 9 years, and and it's not that, hey, we're just stagnant. Like, literally, we continue to get referrals. We ask when we inbound a call, when people book a call on our website, it asks for that referring physician. And even to this day, we're seeing doctors I've never even heard of before, right? Oh, Dr. So-and-so. And doctors talk amongst themselves. So it's like, one doctor that's now just jumping into environmental illness and treatment. Oh, well, I need a mold inspector. Who are you guys using? Well, we use this company. Okay, great. So then we asked that, and like the doctors, like if they weren't seeing positive results coming from their patient population, we would have stopped getting referrals a long time ago. And I can say that with confidence because we're still getting like 90-95% of our business is still that direct doctor referral. And we have some very, very long-term doctors that have been referring patients I actually worked with a doctor that was referred my very first customer in 2013. And she just bought a house. So she had me come out and look at the house for her. But I'm like, you sent me my first customer. And, she didn't know that. And it's not like you're going to share that. Hey, this is my first customer, but a long time ago. So it was kind of a neat, but that's how long she's been in partnership with my company, which is really, it's humbling, because it's like, I don't know. It's really, it's an emotional dynamic, because the reality is if we weren't providing benefit, I'd have been out of business a long time ago. Right. And at this point, I can't keep up. Right. I'm still, and I just can't hire anybody. I'm sure you guys deal with the same thing. Like,
it's hard. It's hard to find the right people.
Right. Coming and working with me. Like I parted ways with a guy who actually became very good friends with, because he knew the home side of things, but he never really bought into the health side of things. So at the end, he was having a different perspective on recommendations that we were making and saying we were kind of extreme. And it's like, well, we are, but there's a reason for that. The doctors expect it to be to a certain extent, to the extremity that, like, no matter how environmentally sensitive you are, we're going to get that home safe for you. Right. Yeah. So, and not everybody maybe needs that, but we have to defer to that elevated level to make sure. And then, and then again, we always defer back to that referring physician to help guide that patient on what they should and shouldn't do, and how much, like, to what extent of those recommendations are required. And a lot of them are maintenance driven items, and we find those big, massive things, obviously, right, as well, which cause massive illness and massive contributing factors. Sorry, I get on this.
I honestly, Jason, like whenever I originally called you, I thought it was going to be a disappointing phone call. And you like lifted my spirits that day, because it's rare to find good people and like you know.
Well,
I love that you just said what you just said about there's a reason why you're extreme, because there is.
Yeah.
You know, we have to go that far in order to make sure that we get that environment back to a healthy state, that we find it all, you know,
right.
where, so yeah.
And I felt the same thing on our phone call too. Like I actually went around talking to like Teresa, my admin, and there's actually somebody in Texas that does things the way I do it. Oh my goodness, I've never heard of anything like that. Which is, so I went away from our phone call very much the same way, because you know the idea that you actually called me to kind of, you know, test the waters for a patient, a customer, you know, for a doctor down there. Like I was like, okay, well that's awesome that she's doing that, but like, what's this call going to be like? You know, I have very low expectations when it comes to, you know, to talking to other professionals in our industry. And again, at conferences, at other places, it's just it's an interesting dynamic. So the expectation was very low. And so talking to you was the response from my side of things was very, very similar to yours as you're sounding. So it was very refreshing to know that somebody else is out there that actually believes in the same philosophies that we do.
Okay, so we're friends now. So we're just going to publicly
say. Absolutely.
You made the cut.
Yeah, and I as soon as that, I mean, because we get, you know, we occasionally get patients that call, or customers that call in from other places, and like again, I don't do a lot of marketing. I did the Oregon Naturopathic Conference this year for the first time. That was the only money I spent on marketing in 3+ years. And that was actually it was like, hey, finally the conference is back in person. It was neat to kind of see some doctors, and like, you know, I ran into, I'm sure you guys are familiar with Pans and Pandas, and actually probably very familiar with Pans and Pandas based on your history. But like there's a nonprofit organization up here for the Pacific Northwest. At least I think they're geographically here, but they've been referring their customer population to us for, I think, a year and a half, but I'd never met any of them. And they were at the conference. They're like, oh my God, it's great to meet you finally. So I'm like, that's what that booth was really for, was for that. Because the reality is we're busy, which is a blessing. And that's not, I don't mean to say that in like an arrogant, conceited way, but it's like, we don't necessarily need the business. The marketing happens behind it. Like it happened years ago, and just how we built it. Right. And if you build it right, I guess that's the whole adage, right? If you build it, they will come. Right. So, and, you know, it's like, and that type of philosophy goes really strong, because it's, you know, it's just a wonderful position to be in. And I love what I do again. Yeah. I'm just mumbling at this point.
Well, where can people go if they want to learn more about you? I know you said you're not huge on social media, but your website, could you let everybody know where they can go?
Yeah, I mean, our website is pretty simplistic as well. It's just www.kesterclear.com. So KESTERCLEAR.com. And we have our contact page actually has, we work with a scheduling software that allows people to just go in there and book. So there's a bunch of free calls for information. There's an initial call that people book, and those are all the calls through that website are all through my admin, who's such an amazing resource. Like I'm so blessed to have her as well. We talked about Teresa a little bit, you know, ahead of the game before this call, but I mean, Teresa's an amazing admin. She can answer the majority of questions. She knows she's working with me because she chooses to, not because she wants to. She doesn't have to work. And I'm so blessed that she's there, but she can provide information on, there's a 5-minute call. There's a 15-minute call. The initial call, if somebody's actually looking to hire us, is a 30-minute call. All of those are free. We do free ERMI interpretations as well. So if you have an ERMI, you don't know how to read it, we provide that opportunity for Teresa to provide an ERMI interpretation. You know, we've built an ERMI interpretation document, which we provide to our customers, which is all color coded, and, you know, helps them understand what we like. It's red, green, yellow, that kind of thing. We talk about some of the things that kind of are, and it, you know, I always preface, it's all in the wording it's on the paperwork too. It's like, it's just my interpretation. Nobody agrees with me. It's not, the EPA doesn't agree with my interpretation of this document, but we provide, the reality is so many people do their own ERMI, but they have no clue how to interpret it, right? Somebody will say, hey, do an ERMI, and they spend the $300 or whatever it is on their ERMI to do it themselves, and they just don't know how to interpret it. So those are things that we can offer. And, you know, eventually I may end up having to do, you know, start charging for consultations and things like that. But at this point, we do everything we possibly can to help people, just complimentary. And if somebody actually, the only time we actually really, now I do paid consults too. And, you know, Dr. Krista got on me for not charging for consults, but, and so do other doctors. But We provide what we do. It's free at this point. They can definitely go in there and take a look. And like I said, but our website's pretty rudimentary. It's again, it's a pretty simple website.
Well, thank you. This was fantastic. And I'm sure we will be having more conversations with you in the future because this was amazing.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys. And again, we're aligned for on so many aspects of what and how we do things that like it's a blessing to find other people that are actually in line. And it's such a rarity. So yeah.
Thank you, Jason.